you could paint this picture of the building as an organism, with lungs like the HVAC, and the plumbing is circulatory, and the nervous system is the electrical. And you start looking at the building. Wow, when the building gets sick, usually it's from a failure to shed wind and water. Water gets in the walls, it gets sick, it develops inflammation. Inflammation shows up as mold. Mold sends a pain signal. It's a musty smell. You go all the way down here, and what you realize is when the building gets sick, we get sick. And then when the building heals, so too can we.
Welcome to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, the podcast for high achievers who want to stay sharp, focused, and full of energy despite their diagnosis. With your host, National Board Certified Functional Medicine Health Coach, Julie Michelson, where Julie helps you take your power back from autoimmunity. And now here's your host, Julie Michelson.
Welcome back to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast. I'm your host, Julie Michelson, and today I'm joined by Jason Earle, a man on a mission. Jason is an adoring father, incurable entrepreneur, and indoor air quality crusader. He's also the founder and CEO of 1-800-GOT-MOLD and MycoLab USA, as well as the creator of the Got Mold Test Kit. Jason's experience with chronic illness, loss, and childhood challenges led to his current perspective that the best gifts in life don't come wrapped in pretty paper. In today's conversation, Jason shares how he moved toward a life of contribution as a mold and wellness expert. We discuss the home as the extension of the immune system and how it can make you sick or support your wellness. Jason guides us through mold testing and remediation do's and don'ts, and shares his truly educated and balanced perspective on health and healing. Jason, welcome to the podcast.
So good to be here.
In full disclosure, we just had to stop like mid-sentence and say, we should hit record because this conversation is too good. I was already so excited to have you on the podcast. And now I'm even more jazzed for the audience and listeners to just kind of get a little peek into the real world of people that are trying to change the conversation and contribute to wellness. But let's rewind a little bit, and I'd love for you to share. You have an amazing backstory, which could take the whole podcast, so we won't, but a condensed version. I think your life has been fascinating. And so, how did you get from the kid you were, as we just discussed, growing up in Jersey, to the man who is helping people, again, improve wellness and specifically learn about mold and mycotoxins and the importance of the air quality in their home?
Well, first of all, thanks again for having me, and thanks for the warm introduction. And it's always fun to connect with a fellow Jerseyan.
Yes.
And we were just one town away, which is pretty remarkable, right? I think my story could be summed up as no adversity should be wasted.
Love that.
And if I were to say that there's been any one particular pattern in my life that's made me useful, it's that I've recognized that the best gifts in life don't come wrapped in pretty paper.
Yes.
So
amen.
And so I kind of look for those things. I mine my life for those kinds of opportunities because it's paying it forward, those experiences. So just going back to sort of the beginning, which is usually the best place to start.
Yep.
When I was 4 years old, I was suddenly ill so severely that my parents took me to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I lost a lot of weight and I was having difficulty breathing. And so the initial diagnosis was cystic fibrosis, which was devastating to my folks, as it would be any parents. But in particular, my dad had lost 4 of his cousins to CF. Before the age of 14. So this was their worst case. This is their worst nightmare coming true, And so thankfully, 6 weeks later, they got another second opinion, and I didn't have CF. I don't have CF. I had asthma compounded by pneumonia, and a battery of allergy tests revealed that I was allergic to every single thing that they tested me for. So it was like the entire litany. And I grew up on a little non-working farm surrounded by every allergen possible. in high concentration. And so I lived on inhalers until I was about 12, at which point my folks split up and I moved out of that musty farmhouse and all my symptoms went away.
Ah,
And nobody thought anything about it, anything of it. In fact, I remember them saying, well, Papa grew out of his asthma too. And so it was just dismissed as what they call spontaneous adolescent remission, which is a fancy term for we have no idea what
we
the
don't
hell happened.
know. Uh-huh.
So fast forward, actually, there's two events that were pretty profound to fall within that no adversity should be wasted category. I was diagnosed with, my mom died suddenly when I was 14 to suicide, which is actually relevant to the conversation. And then Lyme disease, I was diagnosed a year later with that. I still don't know if I actually had it, but I do know that I got all the antibiotics, which sent me for,
Right.
quite a journey through, dysbiosis and learning about, low carb diet, the benefits of eliminating refined carbohydrates. And so basically I've been on keto for, 25 years. Just because of digestive issues. Turns out that was actually a good strategy
Good call.
in
Yeah.
general, right?
Yeah.
And then I ended up, because I missed a lot of school, I ended up dropping out of high school to I was going to get my GED in psychology a year early. And I ended up through this, insane circumstance, meeting a guy at the gas station who recruited me to come work for him on Wall Street. So I was 16 at the time. And within a year, I'd become the youngest licensed stockbroker in history with a Guinness World Record, which is a total podcast
Amazing.
for another podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Did that for 9 years, and then grew more and more disenchanted with the fact that I was, the only people that were
Working on
benefiting
Wall
from my
Street.
success. Yeah, just
Yeah.
the only people that benefited from my success were the people who owned the stores where I shopped, and it was
Yeah.
just money for money. And my mom had raised me to contribute to the greater good. She was a nurse. She gave of herself to a fault, but she was a beacon of contribution. She really was. And so I ended up deciding to walk away from Wall Street and went backpacking. And while I was away, I was in Hawaii and I was reading a story about a guy who'd gotten sick from the hotel where he was an employee. And it turns out it was a historic mold problem. It was a $55 million mold remediation project in Oahu. It's still to this day the largest in history. And there were a lot of stories about people that had gotten sick from the building that had blamed the mold, but this is way early in the game before mold was even taken seriously, but this one guy's story really jumped out at me. He was 40 something, developed adult onset asthma, which I had never even heard of, and allergies to all these things he'd never had before. And it was like my life in reverse.
Right.
It was like just red flash. It was just boom, hey, Jason, pay attention, wake up, here's your path.
Ding, ding, ding.
And
Yeah.
so it was, and what captured my attention was not so much the mold, as fascinating as it is. And the more I learn about it, the more fascinating it really is. What fascinated me and what captured my attention still to this day is our relationship with our buildings. The fact that a building can make you sick.
Right.
And now what I'm fascinated with is the idea that buildings can actually allow you to heal, right? So it used to be this dark thing where I was, fascinated by the disease states that it could cause. Now that's just so obvious. What I'm more interested in is how we can do this differently, and how we can start better. If we can start in the first place the right way, that's ideal. But what's really amazing is when you get these things straight. Then all sorts of other healings can happen that have nothing to do with the building. And even relationships heal, families heal. Like there's the sanctuary, the idea of a sanctuary is so multifaceted that it's beyond breath, it's beyond asthma, allergies, autoimmune disease. Even it's a holistic in the WHOLE sense of the word. And so this is, this has been 23 years, I guess I've been in this space, which is a blink of an eye. And this, and it's amazing to me, but, and I learn something new every day because there's so much emerging science around this. And, it's been quite a journey. So what happened was I came back from Hawaii armed with a lot of curiosity and ended up getting into the remediation business for a hot minute and saw that it was a hot mess. And decided to do inspections. I was learning a lot at night, reading a lot, and taking courses at building science courses at universities and stuff like that, wherever I could. And decided I wanted to do something to help protect consumers from the contractors. because the contractors were just taking people for a ride using chemicals instead of cleaning and often charging outrageous prices, leaving buildings worse than they found them. And so the purpose behind me getting into this space really bristled
Yeah.
against that whole thing. And so I got involved in the inspection side of things, doing it usually for free at night while I learned. And then I got a bead on a mold sniffing dog. Believe it or not, I saw a story in the
Yes.
news about a
Yep.
dog trained to sniff out mold in buildings. And I thought, oh man, that's just about crazy enough to be brilliant.
Uh-huh.
I dove into the deep end, and Oreo, who was my four-legged partner, and I got a lot of national press, and we found a lot of hidden mold and solved a lot of problems. Never had to advertise at all, and that company became 1-800-GOT-MOLD. It started as lab results because we use Labrador retrievers
That's
and
cute.
laboratory testing. But we became 1-800-GOT-MOLD. And then in recent years, it was frustrating to me that the people who needed us most are the ones who couldn't afford it
Yeah.
for us. So that led to the genesis of the Got Mold Test Kit, which is the most affordable, high quality at home test kit available on the market, which is what brings us here to today.
I love it. I love it. Accessibility. Yeah. And that evolution, right, is like first the awareness, and then how can I help? What can I do? What's broken with this system? And then how do we get the right stuff in people's hands? Because it is, I, I built the home that I'm in right now 7 years ago. Um, and I have, all hard surfaces, it was, I was way more educated than I was the last time I built a home. And I am fortunate. For some reason, I enjoy building my sanctuary. And shortly after, I don't even think I was here a year when I was suspicious about a mold issue and doing what I do. I know enough to know new home doesn't equal no mold.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know how expensive it was. I know how to get the good inspector, right? And so I know what I paid, and we talked about this, and we're going to circle back to, this vigilance.
Mm-hmm.
And so I am vigilant. I have in the past been hyper vigilant. So I spent money that, I wouldn't expect anybody to spend without a health issue, because I had some visible mold. I wanted to make sure there wasn't other mold. And even just that testing process and knowing what the remediation estimate was, I ended up not needing remediation because, we're exposed to all kinds of, not all mold is bad. And maybe we can talk about that too, or, a concern for health. I did make some changes, but so I know firsthand, and then having clients that have had to remediate. And just the whole, that's an additional, there's the finances and the trauma
Mm-hmm.
of that whole process for somebody who usually at least one person in the family is already really sick, right? So it's a big thing. And I remember actually, and we didn't talk about this before we hit record, but I remember the first time I met you. I happened to be speaking at a conference, and I saw you just tripped across your booth, and I was really, really excited because until then, at least in my knowledge, there wasn't really a good way for people to reliably, people were still, doing ERMI tests and sending them in, but
Which they still do,
yeah,
unfortunately.
they still do. But there wasn't a reliable way for somebody to test their own home. And so I love that you just keep up leveling that level of service, right? It's like, okay, now we know. And for those of you that haven't heard of the mold sniffing dogs, they're real, they're amazing. I
Truly,
know we have some
truly.
people here in Colorado doing it. It makes perfect sense. If they can detect cancers, why can't they detect mold?
And mold's not even a moving target, right? So,
Right,
it's just
right.
sitting there, just spewing its
Yeah,
gases, and so no, it's one of the easiest targets ever, really, for
yeah,
dogs. Yeah.
yeah. So I have 5,000 directions I want to go with the conversation. So I will say right here with listeners in as my witness, I want to have you come back because I know what I thought I wanted to talk about today, but I know we need to talk about what's going on in your life right now, because it relates to this whole conversation. Maybe before we jump in there, because I do get carried away. I'm a damn not chatty Jersey girl. Um, it
Well,
just
you met your match
happens.
here, so.
Exactly. um, before we jump to that, let's talk, just educate listeners about gut mold and why this is different. So, what is the difference between someone doing their own ERMI test and somebody using gut mold? Because I
Sure.
think it's important for people to understand just the difference.
Yeah, a little contrast.
Yeah.
Um, well, and let me first start off by saying that there's no silver bullets when it comes to testing.
Yes.
And
Correct.
people want to have a test that will eliminate the need for a professional, and that does not exist. This is why ERMI is so problematic, is because people do use it as a be all end all.
Right.
It is promoted as that. It's actually the most wildly flawed test that's available, because it is always high. And so what it does, it's like a broken clock that's right twice a day.
Right.
It supports commercial confirmation bias. I mean, it is a cognitive bias, uh, rat's nest.
Mm,
And it is used by professionals that are both well intended and with malintent, in equal doses, because
gotcha.
it drives a ton of revenue. It drives a ton of revenue for protocols. It drives a ton of revenue for inspections and remediation. It's a lead generator for an entire industry, and so it's a real problem. And it confirms people's concerns. So even if you don't have a mold problem, but you've got this, if you've got symptoms and you do an ERMI, you're going to say, "See, I knew it."
Right.
And the ERMI found the mold. No, the ERMI didn't find the mold. The ERMI found spores, and spores are abundant in our world. So abundant are they that Kingdom Fungi produces 50 megatons. Kingdom Fungi, including
Wow.
mushrooms and microfungi, so that's yeast and mold, produce 50 megatons of spores every year, which is the equivalent of 500,000 blue whales. Okay. This is 20 times as much tea as the entire world consumes every year. Most of them land in the prairies and the mountaintops and the ocean. And so, but the point is that we are abundant. Spores are abundant in our world. They are the most prolific biological particulate, that we encounter. So the fact that spores happen to be hiding in the corner with dust bunnies is not a sign of a mold problem. It's a sign of a normal environment. And in fact, we need mold spores in our environment to a limited degree because they are what's known as hormetic stressors.
Yes.
They provide us with a little bit of it's like the dose makes the poison, right?
Yeah.
Paracelsus, right? It's one of the fundamentals of toxicology. And so we need these little stressors in our life to teach us what's normal in the environment.
Uh,
And so if we absent those, we end up being actually hypersensitive. We end up with
right.
real problems, right?
Oh,
This
like
whole
going into a lockdown during a
huh.
viral?
Yeah, nobody knows what that's like, and a lot of people went overboard with that stuff too, and
Well,
fear
it's just
fear drives a lot of,
understanding our body and our immune system is like without exposures, we have no protection. So,
totally, yeah,
it's yeah. Yeah, I love that you highlight that because just like not every form of everything, and I I may have, mycotoxins in my house. I'm sure I do. I may have
we all do.
something going on in my house. It's not always, and I want to hear kind of your approach for people, but sometimes what's going on in the house is not what's showing up in the body. And so it's not actually the problem.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about mycotoxin testing, but boy, if you think I've got opinions about ERMI, wait till you hear what I have to say about these urine panels. Um, so what we have here is, basically a test that's 20 years old. This was based on an EPA study, and it's been hijacked and used as a tool. That, by the way, is sexy. It's DNA based. It's PCR, right? So like it's got all this appeal to people that are in the sciences and the health space. But the fact is that it is always high. And I know this because I've been doing inspections for 23 years, and I followed up on high ERMIs with mold sniffing dogs for 18 of those years, or well, 12 really with the dogs. Um, and so I know that we could only confirm the actual conditions of a building supporting the ERMI score in less than 10% of those cases, which means
Wow.
that there's no correlation,
Wow.
zero. And every professional I know that's reputable and thorough would concur with that. And it's so severe that, the people that I talk to who write the industry standards that are on the industry standard committees for both the inspection and the remediation side of the business are calling for the EPA to actually
Goodness.
pull it from ban it from the labs, but the labs continue to sell it because it's so lucrative. And there's no longer even patents not protected anymore, so they don't have to pay royalties even. So it's even more lucrative. So it's a real problem, and it is not a useful tool, no matter what anybody says. It is a tool it's an inflammatory tool, no pun intended, or maybe it's
Yeah.
pun intended. And so anyway, so that's one of the reasons why we created the Got Mold test kit, was because I saw so many people being harmed by this misinformation. So now the other tool is the inspector that comes in and just does quick samples and then doesn't do an inspection. So what I wanted to do was just knock that guy out of the box. If you're going to come in and just do a few samples and then just send someone a report, I can do that, but they don't have to. You have to spend $1,000 or $2,000 to have the pleasure and privilege of doing that, right?
Yeah.
So what we did was we created an air sampling pump that duplicates a professional piece of equipment that's $1,000 and requires calibration. We make ours for a whole lot less. People call it the egg, and it pulls air through a spore trap, which is the most common form of air sampling on the market. Now, some people will say, well, it doesn't find hidden mold. Well, neither does an ERMI. It's confirmation bias that ERMI finds spores. So you always have a high reading, and you may not always have a high reading with an air sample, but that doesn't mean that the ERMI found mold that's meaningful. And meaningful data is meaningful. Data is not meaningful. Meaningful data is meaningful. And so what we decided to do was just take that sliver of the market and democratize it so that anyone can test their air without having to schedule appointments, without having to deal with conflicts of interest and all that kind of stuff. Now, but here's the catch: because there's no silver bullet, you can actually test your air. You've got two kinds of mold. Let me back up. You got two kinds of mold: mold on a wall and mold in a wall. Mold on a wall will generate spores that can become airborne. Mold in a wall, generally speaking, doesn't. And so if you've got a musty smell on normal spore counts, which can happen, and it happens all the time, we know that you have a hidden mold problem. Well, guess what? That means you have to hire a professional. In most cases, you may have to anyway. Someone who's got specialized skills in detection. You hope you don't.
Sorry to interrupt you, but this is such a pet peeve of mine, because I know really educated people that are like, we're going to remediate it ourselves. Oh, my husband's an engineer. And I'm like, no, stop it. Don't you open that wall. Don't
The learning curve is steep, and the cost of failure is high.
Yeah.
And so this is like, you don't do open heart surgery on yourself. You don't, this is surgery on your house. Make no mistake. If, when you look at the way we interact with our buildings, they are in many ways, they're an extension of our immune system. You could paint this picture of the building as an organism, with lungs like the HVAC, and the plumbing is circulatory, and the nervous system is the electrical. And you start looking at the building. Wow, when the building gets sick, usually it's from a failure to shed wind and water. Water gets in the walls, it gets sick, it develops inflammation. Inflammation shows up as mold. Mold sends a pain signal. It's a musty smell. You go all the way down here, and what you realize is when the building gets sick, we get sick. And then when the building heals, so too can we. So we've got this symbiotic relationship with our buildings, right? These are not just boxes that we live in. And so when you start thinking about an inspection or even testing, think about mold testing, like our test, as a pregnancy test kit. It's a first step. It's a cost-effective first step, right? It's not the end, it's the beginning. And this is the beginning of gathering clues. And if you go to the doctor with a high cholesterol reading or something like that, they're not going to immediately schedule a stent installation, or an open heart surgery. They're going to say, hey, let's do a physical. How are you feeling? What's your diet like? And that's what an inspection should be, where you're actually gathering data about the state of the building. It's a physical of the building, and then if necessary, then you go with a team approach to surgery, and that requires the oversight. Usually, you'll engage multiple professionals for that. And so you should have an inspector involved that will spec that out, and that will, sort of shuttle you through. And then you do the requisite testing at the end to make sure it's been done. So I highly encourage people to think about this in phases and steps. and to think about this as a as a learning experience, not just a problem to solve. Because if you figure this out and you learn how buildings operate and you learn where the water gets in and you learn how these materials handle water, actually mishandle water, then you will become armed to handle these things better when it happens, because it will. Our homes are built to fail. They are disposable paper mache chemical
Yeah.
boxes that get moldy quickly when they get wet.
Often close to airtight.
And they're too airtight, so we rebreathe the same toxic air. And when I say toxic, I'm not being hyperbolic.
No.
We used carcinogenic building materials. It's insane that we
Yeah.
regulate everything, but we allow building materials to be made of the things that they're made of, and that they get moldy, and then off gas, both man-made VOCs and then also microbial VOCs. And so then we rebreathe them 20,000 times a day, 13 to 15
Right.
times a minute. It's 20,000 times a day. That's 20,000 doses. Okay. So if you take 20,000 doses of anything, that's going to be cumulative. And so if that is not pristine, then that is going to work against you. So your indoor environment is this really cool place where you have a disproportionate amount of potential for control, unlike any other area of your
Yes.
life,
Yes.
right?
I always say make your home your haven, and then you'll form that resilience to handle the outside world hits, the stuff that we
Absolutely.
can't control.
You need to
So I
rest.
love
You need to
that.
rest. So this is the backdrop for all of the reason that we created this test is not to solve the problems of testing, because it is a way for you to actually get involved, get into our knowledge funnel. We make the tools, we offer the knowledge, and we hopefully raise the awareness. And
Right.
those three things. So if you just buy the box and take the samples and then get the kit, get the results, and then you just take the reading and that's it, and you think that's that you've done
You're
everything you
done.
need to do, then you have misunderstood the entire purpose of what we've built. The purpose is to arm you with the tools, knowledge, and awareness that you can start to really become. It's like the teach a man to fish versus fish more, right?
Sure.
And so we want to teach people how to fish, and we want people to understand how to operate this thing, which is a unique extension of your immune system, and to learn how the rhythms of the building actually impact the rhythms of your world. And they're inextricably connected. So, we're, by the way, in the same breath, we've got this test that we've developed, which is a spore trap based test. We've partnered with the number one lab in the world, Eurofins. So we've got the best results you can possibly imagine when it comes to spore traps. And our report is super easy to understand. It's green, yellow, orange, red.
Right.
And we're also working on a dust test to solve the problems with ERMI. We're also working on some human diagnostics. That's a secret. And so we're working on a really cool blood test for mold exposure that is actually a test for mold exposure as opposed to a test for food-based mycotoxins, which is what those urine panels are. The urine panels are another tool that's unfortunately been used and then abused to extract resources from people, knowingly or unknowingly. Airborne mycotoxins are really not a big deal, believe it or not. I know that sounds crazy, but unless you're in a high spore count environment where the mold's been recently disturbed, and also that's very significant amounts, mycotoxins do not become airborne easily. The data on this is very strong. The data that supports airborne mycotoxins is not only weak, it's zero. There's not been one person, there's not one study. This is not, the study is this high on food as a source of mycotoxins.
Sure.
And there is not one study that shows this supports inhalation as a primary exposure route. Not one. And I challenge.
So I'm going to ask you, when you're talking studies, you're not saying airborne mycotoxins can't make us sick.
I'm saying that this may seem crazy. Airborne mycotoxins may trigger in small amounts a disproportionate response in certain individuals. However, they do not accumulate in the body to show up in urine panels. The numbers don't line up. And so what you have here is a lot of scientific leaps that are made. There are gaps that are just there's conflation. There's all
Yeah.
these ideas that just get well if mold. So it's a real problem.
Yeah.
What's really making people sick in buildings with mold is the microbial VOCs, the
Mhm.
gases, the musty smell. These are neurotoxic, and these do become airborne easily. They do show up in the bloodstream and the urine. They are, one particular compound, 1-octantriol, which is the mushroom alcohol that kind of typifies the musty smell, is 40 times more toxic than toluene. 40 times.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
But no one tests for this because it's hard because there are parts per billion. You're very small concentrations. But the mycotoxins are really easy to test for, but they're not coming from your air unless you have very high spore counts, because the mycotoxin cannot become airborne by themselves. So this is
Right.
an important point. They have to be on a carrier particle, spores usually, but also household dust, building materials, things like that.
Right.
And that means it has to be disturbed.
Which
So if
is why I get so upset when people are like, "Oh, I'm gonna tear that wall open and
yeah,
see."
don't
Because
do that.
now
Yeah,
you
do
just
not
gave it
do
a
it.
vehicle. Don't do that.
Yeah, so listen,
Yeah.
in the next phase, so most people who are getting sick from mold are not getting sick from the mycotoxins. They really truly are not. They are getting sick from the because again, the quantities are not sufficient to generate the kind of widespread illness. And also, let me also say this: only about 100 species produce them.
Okay.
So if we're going to blame 100 species on all the mold related illness, when we're talking about 100,000 species in existence and about 1,000 commonly found in buildings, we're going to say that we shouldn't worry about the other ones. And while some molds are more benign than others, all mold growth produces the musty smell.
Right.
And we know that these are toxic compounds, both in terms of just pure toxicity, cellular toxicity, but also neurotoxicity. So that's why you get a lot of the cognitive impairment, and
Mhm.
you see a lot of the really heavy stuff. The digestive issues that molds produce are, by the way, probably more induced by the mycotoxins in food. And so there that we have a Venn diagram. That's why I always say that you want to get better. It's air, food, and attitude. Air, you got to get your VOCs, you got to get the chemicals out of your house, and you got to get the mold and dampness fixed. Food, you got to eat clean. You got to get rid of the processed stuff, and you've got to get rid of the conventional meat and dairy because they're getting a lot of carryover. And
Well,
then
and
attitude is the big one.
that's the part, and I would say start with attitude, even though I just cut you off when you were saying attitude. But the part about the mycotoxin panel that I do love, and I just learned so much, and I'm gonna just shift approach, is that because there is the data in the food system, the things that they're telling you to avoid if you have high mycotoxin exposure are the things that are inflammatory anyway. And it
Absolutely.
becomes that's a whole nother conversation with, is it the gluten? Is it the glyphosate? I don't know. Is it the mycotoxin or is it doesn't matter. Don't
Doesn't
eat
matter.
it.
That's right.
Just don't eat
You
it.
you can do a lot by, and by the way, I agree with you on the attitude part, because
Yeah.
a lot of people land on the attitude, and attitude can sound dismissive, and it's not. That's not what I mean by that, and I use that only because it rhymes. It's really more mindset, and it's also psychophysiology. So there's the problem
Yes.
we get into is our nervous system gets whacked out.
Yes.
And so, I see real healing happen with neural retraining. I mean, really
Hmm.
profound, deep healing. And so much so that oftentimes people who I know that have had the worst, I mean, death's door that have 180-degree turnaround, they often will say that they think it was the neural retraining that really cured it. And so now they're resilient. Now they can, be in moldy buildings even, or go into a hotel or an Uber with the air fresheners and not have this unbelievable fight or flight. And so I agree with you. I think if you're really sick with this stuff, you should start neural retraining immediately.
Yeah.
Primal
I just think
trust, DNRS, but also just more acceptance around these things. It's a part of our
yeah.
normal world.
Yeah, and I do think it again back to the psychophysiology, and I'll really dumb it down. Everybody, has heard of placebo effect, and we all think it has to do with prescriptions, but it's not. It's a process in the body. I mean, it can be, but it really does help healing exponentially quicker, I think, And it took me a while in my practice to realize, oh, we shouldn't just get to that later. Like let's front load that and make
Amen.
everything else work better. And so I love, especially if we're talking about mycotoxins. I mean, often even over Zoom, if I have a consult with somebody over Zoom, and using my intuition is always part of like directing, right? Or, what am I prioritizing? What am I thinking or feeling? There is like a vibrational energy that certain people with mycotoxin illness have that I immediately, like, I know within the first 2 minutes of talking to them, or I expect that that is a major thing driving their
Hmm.
inflammation, and it almost always is. Like, I can feel it. I can't describe it to you how it would be different than somebody else with a different kind of anxiety, but there is something about what's going on in there.
Yep.
And it's real. I'm not saying it, that means it's in your head, right? We're not saying you can retrain your brain and that means you were never sick. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, it's really powerful.
It is, and let me clarify this because I'm someone who went through the mold-related illness. I was fortunate enough to get out of it early enough that I didn't have, and I was pubescent. So, and I also stopped eating lousy food, which was, by the way, I was automatically detox. I
Right.
haven't participated in that form of diet in a long
I like
time,
that.
and so as a result, I inadvertently detoxed.
Yeah.
And so, but what happens here oftentimes is, and it is ironic, and we could talk about my house over time, but what you end up with is usually it's a chemical exposure that creates a mold sensitivity, or a mold exposure that creates a chemical sensitivity, and it's a Venn diagram. All right, and so you've got this huge overlap, and because the mold again produces VOCs, the musty smell are VOCs, and those VOCs are I would assert that they are, on an evolutionary basis, we recognize them as decay. This is a very important thing, right? We know we have a
Yes.
visceral response to feces, vomit, dead animals, the smell.
The
This
smell of a
mold
rotting
is
mouse, because in my
it's
barn,
visceral.
I can smell that from a mile
Yep.
away.
And mold is in the same category, I think,
Yeah.
on an evolutionary basis. And so our sense of smell is wrapped up around the trigeminal nerve in the face, the olfactory sense, and the trigeminal, which is a primal a nerve set, cranial nerve set in the face that has these amazing chemosensory capabilities. They're like a spidey sense, and they
Yeah.
can pick up compounds way below the odor threshold, including pungent VOCs, which, and by the way, which the musty smell is comprised of. And so what happens is the body becomes attenuated, or it becomes hyper, it becomes exposed, and then goes, wait,
It's
no,
a danger
I
signal.
got that again. Okay, yeah, and then boom, shut down. So your sinuses
Yep.
close down, sinusitis, your lungs close down, asthma. You get headaches, you get inflammation. By the way, the trigeminal nerve will kick off a cytokine storm, and so this is what looks like inflammation is inflammation, but it's actually sensory nerve irritation. And this can happen at really super tiny, I mean, incredibly small exposure levels, once you've become sensitized. And so I'm not saying that the illness is not real. On the contrary, what I'm saying is that a lot of it has to do with the illusion that your nervous system has created. So it is essentially fear at the systemic level. And so learning to accept the fact that, like I said, we got 50 megatons of spores in our,
Right.
right, that we live on planet fungi, right?
Yeah.
Being afraid of mold is like being afraid of gravity.
Right.
That this is a very unproductive way to live. We have to accept the fact that we live on planet fungi and that our buildings are made of mold food. And you're not going to move from building to building to building and actually get away from it. It's not going to happen.
Right.
What you have to do is do the work. And by the way, the work is the neural retraining, and be vigilant about moisture control, chemical reduction and avoidance whenever possible, and then a clean diet. And if you do those three things, I've never seen anybody not get better. But if you leave any one of them out, you probably won't. And so it really is, and it takes work. And so sorry, there's no pill, potion, or powder that's going to fix this.
Yeah.
But if you do the work, I see those people get better. And by the way, you also have to believe you can.
Yes. Yes. Or tell yourself you can until you believe it.
Yeah, I mean, you got to step into those shoes at some
However,
point, right?
however you get there.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
had if you have to affirm and you gotta,
I,
you gotta believe it. You gotta at least you have to have that vision of healing. You have to affirm that this is not the way your life has to be.
I have to say, um, I'm really so surprised. I already said in the beginning I was excited for our conversation, but I've spoken to a lot of people who end up, and for some reason, especially in the mold realm, people who become mold experts end up pigeonholed in this little narrow box, and everything is mold, everything is mold, everything is mold, everything is mold. And you are the most well-rounded mold expert I've ever spoken to. I genuinely appreciate that because we are whole humans. And you really just gave us such a great it just the way you explain like what is going on in the body and kind of what's real and what's fear tactic and why, well, if we're getting that fear triggered anyway, even if we're not aware of it, and now the industry, and I'm not even just saying mold expert, and even, I've been guilty of it, the functional medicine, integrative medicine, um, it, and then this whole inspectors and all there's a lot of fear piled on, and just remediating your home if that's what it needs and not changing everything else, or not everything else, but at least, the chemical reduction and the clean diet. I mean, it always is tipping point. Like you said, we're all exposed all the time, right? So
Always.
why it's the same. I had that thought when you mentioned being diagnosed with Lyme when you were younger. It used to really, really annoy me when my fiance, who I've been working with for 8 years, used to say, okay, so she has Lyme, like, but why is it making her sick?
Hmm.
So many of us have, would test positive for Lyme. It's what's going on in her body that it's not kicking it. And I used to get frustrated because I wasn't fully well yet. Like, oh, I know you're a doctor, but maybe you just don't understand. And I'm like, oh, he's always right. you know, because we should be able to handle these things if we take into, if we are working to reduce our toxic exposure, making sure we're not living in a musty, moldy home, doing the things, not eating the gross food. I mean, I think of if I had something sitting on the counter and I was still living back in Florida where it was like 1,000,000% humidity, right? And it was just sitting in some kind of container and it was just completely moldy. Would I eat it?
Of
Like,
course not.
why is that okay that grains are handled that way in our food system? And then we eat meat that ate those grains. I mean, not all of us do, but why is that okay for that to
Every
be the,
restaurant you
the
go into
norm?
is
That's why we cook
unless
at home.
yeah. Yeah, no, I mean
Yeah,
it's so abundant that it is the norm, not the
yeah,
exception, right? And so you have to be vigilant. But going back to the beginning, with a hypervigilance is fear
yes,
driven.
right.
Vigilance is discerning, and so like I always say it's like approaching a traffic light. Traffic intersections are dangerous. You
Right.
can, I mean, people die in intersections
Right.
every day. I mean, just, every 10 minutes, probably there's a traffic accident with someone dying in an intersection. You drive up to one, man, you potentially could be very fearful about approaching an intersection. But the reality is all you have to do is watch the signals
Yes.
and
And
and be discerning, make a
yeah,
left when appropriate, make a right, just making informed decisions. So you can either
yes.
approach it with fear or you can approach it with discernment, and that's the decision making process that is the difference between vigilance and hypervigilance.
Yeah.
You have your
And
hands on the steering wheel.
hypervigilance is, I had mentioned this earlier. I believe an often, typical part of the healing process.
Absolutely.
It's not a healthy place to stay. And what I want to do is invite you back to have that second conversation about just that. and about how we stay vigilant and what happens to even people like you and myself when we're not. Because
Absolutely.
I think it's another really, really important conversation, and I want listeners to be able to digest this and understand a little bit. I do have one kind of mold testing, remediating question for
Sure.
you. Total
Shoot.
opinion question, but obviously on the record since we're recording.
And you can
Um,
tell I don't have any opinions, you know.
no, me either. um, what is, but on this one, yours is definitely more educated, and I do something instinctually. And sometimes I say, I'm cynical because I am a Jersey girl, which just means I question.
Hmm.
Um, if somebody is at where they're going through the mold inspector process, maybe they started with gut mold test and they got mold, you know, and they're going to the next level and they're looking for an inspector or they've had an inspection and they need a remediator. Do you have feelings about companies that do both under one umbrella?
Yes, I do. I have strong opinions about this, and I also would like to talk really quick before we end this about the things to be aware of in addition to any sort of at-home testing. So there's a rubric, if you will. So first of all, companies that do testing and inspections are a no-no. It's unfortunate that a lot of
Thank you.
places are rural and do not have the diversity of offerings. So as a result, many of them do butter their bread on both sides. I do know some that I would say probably are ethical. However, it is
Sure.
just the room for abuse is too great, and the
Yeah.
profitability is also
Right.
too tempting. And so,
Like
and
going to the
again,
orthopedic surgeon, you're going to get surgery.
yeah, I mean, don't ever ask the
Sorry.
barber if you need a haircut, right?
Right.
And it's just you gotta go to a mechanic and ask for safety, and say, hey, is there something wrong with my car? And you're gonna get a
Right.
big bill, right? It's just it is
Yeah.
the nature of the beast, and also I also deal with a lot of remediators who are not qualified to do an assessment. They don't know anything about mold. They know a little bit about buildings, maybe, but they truly don't know anything about it. They all want to use chemicals, by the way. And I have to really, I mean, I have to educate these guys every single time about the importance of not using antimicrobials and chemicals, and fogging and all this kind of stuff. There's an industry standard that specifically advises against these things. And all these guys claim to be certified, but no one follows the standard. So I think it's important to have an inspector who does follow the industry standard, the IICRC S520, who will oversee it, who will keep your contractor accountable, and that will be your advocate. An inspector
Mm,
is really your advocate. Is not just a guy who's going to find mold. Somebody who should guide you through the process, who gives you a written work plan, who will hold the remediators accountable if they fail, and make them come back and do more work without additional compensation until the property has been restored to a normal condition, which is what the standard defines as a successful remediation. Normal condition, not mold free, not
right.
sterile. It is a normal condition, which means that there's going to be some spores, but there's no active moisture problem. There's no excessive fungal growth. There's no excessive fungal matter, rather, and there's no musty smell, and there's no people having symptoms that are transient. In other words, when you leave the building, you get better. Um,
Right.
and that's a good segue into the final piece here, which is, I think,
Yes.
using a test kit, as I said, is not a silver bullet. There is no silver bullet. So what you want to do is here's how you know if you've got a mold problem. Doesn't matter if you've got high spore counts or not. Spore counts are important because mold obviously high spore counts is a mold problem.
Right.
But if you have a musty smell, you probably have a mold problem. If you have a history of water damage, and I'm not talking about a leak one time, I'm talking about a history of water damage, dampness, excessive dampness. So we're talking about condensation on windows in the wintertime, especially, where you've got, high humidity, 70% or more for 3 or 4 days is enough to create a mold problem, significant mold problem. So, or if you have symptoms that get better when you leave the building. If you have any of those things, you probably have a mold problem, regardless, by the way, of spore counts. So right. So if you've got a high spore counts, musty smell, symptoms that seem to get better when you leave the building, a history of water damage. If you say yes to any of those, and no to any other ones. It doesn't. The no's don't negate the yes.
Right.
Right. It's just like cancer. You can if you want to diagnose a building, if you want to diagnose a body, same kind of thing. You do if you're looking at for cancer, you don't just do a blood test.
Right.
You'll miss a lot, right? You'll miss a lot of cancers if you just do a blood test. If you just do imaging, you're going to miss all the blood cancers, right?
Right.
If you just do a physical, you're gonna miss all the internal stuff. So
Right.
you have to do a physical. You have to do imaging. You have to do bloods, right? You look at the whole person, and buildings are the same way. So you have to look for. You have to engage your senses, and that's why I always say, if you see something, smell something, or feel something, do something.
Ah, love
And
it.
do it quickly because it only takes 24 to 48 hours for a moisture problem to turn into a mold problem. So it is one of those things where you don't want to wait. You don't want to wait a week until your husband or wife comes home from travel or until the insurance adjuster gets there.
Right.
You've got 24 to 48 hours when something gets wet and stays wet before mold starts to grow. So, and the longer you wait, the more expensive it is to remediate. And by the way, insurance only covers water damage in the first 72 hours, FYI. So if you do have a water damage issue and it is big enough to engage insurance, they will not cover it past 72 hours because they don't cover mold.
Wow.
So you have to move quickly on these things.
Yeah.
This is not something you want to sit around and wait on.
Amazing. I mean, I'm going to go back and listen to this again. Again and take more notes. I mean, packed with just a lot of gold. Really, really incredible information. Because I know if I'm learning things in this conversation, when this has been such a big part of my path, then I know listeners are getting a lot of value. So I highly recommend. In addition, if I can get you back on to talk about our topic on vigilance and what happens when you're not, even when you're educated and even when you do this kind of stuff for a living, because I think there's a lot of value in that too. But this one
Absolutely.
is definitely, and this is like totally just a minor detail, but what is the test turnaround time now?
So we have everything goes by prior. So when you use our kit, you collect the samples and it goes back. The samples go back into a prepaid return mailer, and that is priority mail. So it's 1 to 3 business days in the mail or
Right.
post. So it's U.S. Postal Service time plus maximum 3 business days at the lab. So usually it's a 2-day
That's
turnaround.
amazing.
So we usually get results out to people in like 5 days or so. And all with our kits, all lab fees, shipping both ways are all included. So there's nothing else.
Right.
We would include
No
first battery.
hidden. Yeah.
No hidden fees. That's the other
Yeah.
thing. We just wanted to make it really easy and simple and transparent for everybody. And by the way, for your listeners, we created a welcome page. And
Nice.
so anyone who's interested in learning more can go to gotmold.com/inspire.
I love it.
And there you'll find a link to an ebook we created. It's about 46 pages of inspection checklists and FAQs and, really useful mold information for anyone who's early in their mold journey. But I've had mycologists that are building scientists tell me, man, that book, you should sell it. You shouldn't give it away.
I'm reading it because I already learned so much, and I'm not a newbie to this conversation.
It's really, we built it
Yeah.
we created it to try to give people an easy, safe way to not have to deal with the misinformation that they're going to get from Facebook groups, which is just all fear. And all misinformation. Yep. Just burn your house down and leave with the shirts on your back, and everything's got to be thrown away. These are
take the shirt off your back.
Right.
That's what they say.
Yeah, I mean it's unbelievable. So this is unfortunately, these are the most inflamed people that are not getting better. Don't take advice from people who haven't gotten better.
Right.
Take advice from people who have gotten better. And so we also created a 10% coupon code for anyone who's interested, which is Inspire10, and you can find that coupon code on that page, gotmold.com/inspire. And then anyone who wants to get in touch with us, we're really easy to find. Obviously gotmold.com and Instagram. I have an Ask Me Anything post there that's like evergreen. I just have it pinned.
Oh, fun.
So anyone who wants to ask, I answer every single question.
Nice.
And so that's always there. And so just if anyone has any questions, we're here to help.
Amazing. Incredible. So before I let you leave, this is your opportunity. You can repeat, you can pull something new, but listeners know to be ready for what is Jason's one step listeners can take starting today to improve their health. Trick question, I know.
Open your windows.
Thank you. Love it.
Get outside. We've separated ourselves from nature. It's the word human comes from humus, which is soil. And we have essentially disconnected ourselves from our true heritage, and I believe that that's the root of most autoimmune disease. Honestly, the fact that we are no longer exposed to mold spores and on a regular basis, transient, regular, but nature is they say within the wound lies the medicine, and so and I believe that that's true here as well. And so be vigilant about your house, clean up water quickly, all that's good stuff. Have a vacuum, use your filters and all that stuff, but then open the windows and go outside and re-engage and take your shoes off and take a walk in the woods, because this is where we spent 99.9% of our history as humans outside. Only the last very tiny rounding error part of it, this infinitesimally small percentage of our existence as a species indoors. And this is when we've had asthma, allergies, autoimmune disease, cancer, autism, all these things skyrocketing in just 2 generations. Yeah. What have we done wrong? Well, it's these boxes we live in, and it's the fact that we've separated ourselves from nature. So go open your windows, take a deep breath, it's all going to be okay.
Jason, thank you so very, very much.
My pleasure.
For everyone listening, remember you can get those show notes and transcripts by visiting inspiredliving.show. I hope you had a great time. Seriously, listen to this like 3 or 4 times. I'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity. Did you enjoy this episode? Please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to get a transcript of this and every other episode, just head on over to inspiredliving.show or click on the link in this episode's description. There, you can also find everything we discussed in this episode, including links and information about our guest. You can even send in your questions to be answered by Julie in a future episode. That's inspiredliving.show. Until next time, this is Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, helping you take your power back.